Have you noticed that people are terrible? What I mean specifically is when something happens, two armies deploy onto the internet, and both of them are committed to letting you know that the members of the other army are the worst thing that has ever happened to humanity. I feel like discovering the origins of this could be the topic of its own video, but in my mind, it started with the movie The Last Jedi coming out, and after that, it was just required that you be angry about everything always. And the worst thing is once you join one of these teams, it predetermines how you're going to feel about a piece of art before it comes out. This is the environment into which The Sound of Freedom released, and in my opinion, they took advantage of that environment. They exploited it to make their pretty unremarkable movie seem like it was far more important than it actually was. Let's talk about it. There's one thing we should get out of the way really quickly, though. You cannot talk about the topic of The Sound of Freedom, Tim Ballard, or Operation Underground Railroad without necessarily making references to human trafficking and the child victims of human trafficking. The tone of this video is not going to be very heavy, but that is necessarily a very heavy topic. If you just don't want to deal with any references to that, the time to click away from this video is, in fact, now. Also, I am going to be spoiling everything about the movie The Sound of Freedom. I don't think there's a lot there to be spoiled, if I'm being honest, but consider yourself warned about that too. Let's get going. The Sound of Freedom is a movie that you may have never heard of, although maybe you have. It's actually been on the front page of my Amazon video recommendations for a while. They very courteously made it free after I paid $15 for it. Please subscribe to my channel. I've sacrificed so much to make this video. After paying 15 American dollars to watch The Sound of Freedom, I assumed I was going to do like a summary and takedown of it in the style of like Drew Gooden or Danny Gonzalez. But unfortunately then I watched it and realized
it was aight.
This movie occupies a really annoying place on the quality spectrum. It's not good enough for me to recommend it, and I don't recommend it. And it's not bad enough for me to do a play-by-play takedown and have it be hilarious, especially given the subject of the movie. Instead, what I'm going to do is give you a quick overview of the plot so that you can see why, in my opinion, the online reaction to this movie has been so insane. The movie opens on Rocio Aguilar, who is the MacGuffin of the movie. Can a person be a MacGuffin? Yes, right? A person can be a MacGuffin. I think so. Anyway, she's the person that the hero has to save for the movie to end on time. Her family is visited by a woman, Giselle, who tells her father that she's going to take the kids and turn them into famous models. Honestly, she talks mostly about Rocio and then the brothers added as an afterthought, which might be reflective of what happened in the script, even though the brother is the less fictional of the two characters. The kids are, of course, kidnapped. And then I stress out like crazy during the sequence in which the father is looking for his missing children. And then we roll the credits, which are the worst thing ever. I really hope this footage was all faked because I hate it, I don't like it, make it stop. After that horrifying sequence, we meet our hero Tim Ballard, who's based on this man, but played by this one. Tim works for Homeland Security catching child predators. But after introducing the audience to his sad face, which we will see a lot of in this movie, he decides he doesn't want to just catch bad guys, he wants to save those kids. So he goes rogue. This seems as good a time as any to address the text that started this movie, based on a true story. I'm not going to get into where they have decorated the truth in this movie. I know that all movies that make this claim do take some liberties. The main reason I'm not going to get into it, though, is the Lore Lodge has already done a great video which goes into enormous detail exploring which of the claims this movie makes are correct and which ones don't hold up. I'm not going to do a better job than he did, so I'll link his video down in the comments. Go ahead and check it out. This also serves my secondary objective of promoting YouTube videos that my wife likes. For our purposes, though, suffice to say that the movie does take a couple liberties with the truth. So Tim Ballard, played by Jim Caviezel, sets up a sting operation where he gets close to this guy who's working to fill every visual stereotype of being a pedophile. And Tim says, "Hey, I'm a pedophile like you." The guy says, "No, you're not." And Tim says, "Uh-huh." So they become best friends, the guy sells Tim a little boy, and then Tim rearrests him. This sets up the most forced-sounding one-liner that I guess they just desperately wanted to put in the movie. Here, look.
I trusted you. Never trust a pedophile.
Now, having established that he's still on the good guy team, Tim talks to the rescued little boy and learns about the MacGuffin, the boy's sister who was captured at the beginning of the movie. Now that he knows about the MacGuffin, Tim makes plans to rescue her so that the movie can end. Tim befriends another guy, awesomely named Vampiro, to set up a big ol' sting operation, and this is where we get the second forced one-liner of the movie, which, here you go.
Why are you doing it?
Because God's children are not for sale.
That's the tagline of the movie, so I guess they had to force it in there somewhere. They set up the big sting, they catch the bad guys, they rescue the kids, but then they see that the MacGuffin wasn't there. To console Tim, Vampiro recites the title of the movie.
Hear that? That's the sound of freedom.
I want to make clear, I don't object to one-liners. I just thought that these were so awkward and forced that I wanted to point them out. This script really needed like one more editing pass. From here, the movie turns into more of an action thriller. Tim heads down into rebel-controlled Colombia, he immediately walks into the MacGuffin, he beats up the bad guy, and he escapes in a hail of bullets. The story wraps shortly after this, and if this sounds like something you'd be interested in, good news, I've actually left out a lot of details. Go ahead and check it out. It's free on Amazon Prime, I think, or maybe Amazon's just making fun of me for paying $15 for it. The reason I took you through this movie's plot is I wanted to bring up 3 points. First, this movie is not great, and it's not bad. It's a decent thriller. Second, this movie takes the heavy topic of human trafficking, particularly child trafficking, and treats it with the gravity you would expect. And 3, if this movie has a thesis, it would be child trafficking is bad. That's probably the least controversial stance you could possibly take on it. So let's get into the controversy. It was in early 2023 that I first heard about The Sound of Freedom. At the time, I'd already been a fan of VidAngel, which is the streaming service owned by the same guys who own Angel Studios, because I'm one of those weird guys who still sometimes likes to filter his movies. I also met Tim Ballard in 2019, and at the time I found him to be charming. We'll come back to the topic of Tim later, but the point is, the fact that Angel Studios was making a movie about Tim Ballard should have been uncomplicated good news for me. The internet went ahead and did its thing and added some complication, because the way I heard about this movie was decidedly weird. Most of the marketing I saw about the movie was actually from social media comments, which, good for you Angel Studios, grassroots marketing, you did it. But the comments were odd. Here's a taste of the sort of things people were saying. You've been lied to for almost 10 years from the news organizations. It's a concerted daily effort to truly program us to believe one way. This little movie that all the proper Hollywood snoots are crying about. The message behind the movie is what is paramount to its importance. Please support this cause and see this movie. You won't regret it. People are all up in arms about racism and slavery. Wake up, people. One day it could be your child. There was a subtext that the movie was being suppressed by Hollywood because I guess it spoke too much truth to power. And of course by subtext I mean that was pretty explicitly the text in some comments. So by seeing the movie you were able to stick it to the man and show them that, the average American does care about child trafficking. Because, Hollywood would never put that on screen. This marketing didn't spontaneously appear, by the way. The movie itself definitely wanted you to think that by going to see it, you were one of the good ones. I mean, look at the clip they played during the closing credits of the movie.
Thank you all for coming out and watching this movie. I'm guessing some of you are feeling sad, maybe overwhelmed, or even a sense of fear, which is understandable. But living in fear isn't how we solve this problem. It's living in hope. It's believing that we can make a difference because we can. This film was actually made 5 years ago. It wasn't released till now, with every roadblock that you can imagine being tossed in the way. And the names you see here on the screen took a stand, and they made sure this story could be shown to all of you. You are the storytellers that can get people to come see this film in theaters. For a couple of months, while Sound of Freedom is in theaters, these kids can be more powerful than the cartel kingpins, or presidents, or congressmen, or even tech billionaires. We believe this movie has the power to be a huge step forward toward ending child trafficking, but it will only have that effect if millions of people see it. Angel Studios boldly has set up a pay-it-forward program where you can pay for someone else's ticket who might not otherwise see it. If you're able, we invite you to pay it forward by buying a ticket for someone else. Join us and millions of others as we ring Sound of Freedom and hope throughout the world. And just remember this, God's children are not for sale.
If you want to combat child trafficking, donate your time or money to an organization that combats child trafficking. I haven't looked into this with great depth, but I will put a small list in the comments of this video that you can check out. Additionally, if you want to raise awareness of child trafficking, whatever that means, then the people you should be raising awareness with are your elected leaders. To be fair, I do think this movie is technically raising awareness of child trafficking. For example, after I saw it, I wanted to helicopter parent my son to make sure he wasn't kidnapped. So that's improvement, right? I think that's improvement, right? My point is, there's a more efficient use of your dollar to combat child trafficking than going to see a mostly fictional video about a guy who used to head an organization that kind of combats child trafficking. Was that foreshadowing? When you go to see a movie, the cost of your ticket, or in my case, the $15 Amazon purchase, is going into a little ballot box that says, I want to see more movies like this. Any other message you think you're sending is totally secondary. What was so weird in the discussion surrounding this movie, and what made me want to make this video in the first place, was the morality people assigned to it. If you saw Sound of Freedom, you were anti-child trafficking, and if you didn't, you were pro, or at best, ambivalent. This idea that if you don't see a movie, you're sympathetic to its antagonists is bonkers. So I'd like to call for a treaty right now. Either we never go down that marketing rabbit hole again, or we commit to doing it with every movie. You didn't see Star Wars? Somebody's pro-galactic empire. Oh, you didn't watch Lord of the Rings? You must be one of the 9 to whom Sauron gave a ring, which I don't expect you to believe this, but I promise I have seen movies other than Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. The problem with me is that I haven't seen that many other movies, so... Avengers. If you haven't seen Avengers 23, you must want to genocide half of the universe. I actually think it's 19. I get it, though, you know? There's this charming underdog narrative surrounding Angel Studios, this movie, and that narrative is strengthened by the idea that this movie was suppressed by the elites, but obviously this movie would not suppress. So bear with me, the words kind of are doing a fair amount of work here. Occam's razor would say the reason the movie wasn't picked up by Hollywood is because it wasn't that great of a movie. I do think that's the most likely explanation. However, it did smash at the box office. It did really well for an indie film, and the people who did see it seemed to enjoy it. I'm sure all of that success comes from the quality of the movie and has nothing to do with the guilt-inducing marketing campaign or the culture war nonsense that surrounded it since day one, or the fact that this is the first movie I've ever heard of that tries to sell you more tickets during the closing credits. But if you ignore Twitter, which you should, then there actually didn't seem to be as many people attacking the film as there were people giving it glowing reviews, although The Guardian really hated it. Of the people who did post anti-Sound of Freedom propaganda, there seemed to be 2 main complaints. 1, the movie's inaccuracies. That's fair enough. 2, the QAnon dog whistles. A coating of plausible deniability covers a film that takes care to be the most anodyne version of itself, all while giving those in the know just enough to latch onto. The traffickers are anonymous foreigners mentioned as rebels in an unspecified regional conflict with no connection to the alleged Clinton crime family, though the title card at the end points back to America as a hub for the $150 billion business of exploitation. This paragraph itself reads like a conspiracy theory. To be fair to The Guardian, they do go on to try and support this stance later in the article. I'll put a link to it in the comments. You can read it for yourself if you'd like and decide how fair you think this assessment is. It does look like Jim Caviezel in public interviews has praised QAnon, so... Good job, man. While The Guardian's take on this is understandable, I don't think that's a good way to look at a piece of art. If we have to look at all the Mission Impossible movies through the lens of Tom Cruise and Scientology, then Hollywood's just not allowed to be fun anymore. By the way, I do think that's actually a valid stance. If you're so turned off by the behind-the-scenes ick of Hollywood that you just want to throw out the whole avocado, I think that's an understandable point of view. I'm just asking for some consistency. I should say that I didn't encounter as much of this anti-Sound of Freedom propaganda, probably as a function of where I live and who I associate with. There is a video that goes into this with a bit more depth, and that's Shoe on Heads, which I actually referenced earlier for a great joke. It is linked below. I recommend you check it out. In any case, I think the positive furor surrounding this movie was overblown, just as I think the negative reaction to it is also kind of unfair. This is a weird little indie thriller that covers a really heavy topic and I think intentionally dragged itself into the culture war in order to get an upswell of ground support from people who wanted you to know that their toast is buttered on the no child trafficking side. And failing that, they could get the Streisand effect out of people criticizing the movie for having a goofy, weird lead actor. And hey, both of those strategies work, which is good because the movie is lionizing Tim Ballard and Operation Underground Railroad. Both of these are uncomplicated, unproblematic, and let's start with the punchline. If you want to combat child trafficking, donating money to Operation Underground Railroad may not be the optimal vehicle for doing that. In 2020, a Utah-based prosecutor opened an investigation into OUR on charges which included communications fraud, witness tampering, and retaliation against a witness, victim, or informant. These charges were dropped, and the prosecutor said, in sum, the Davis County Attorney's Office does not believe that the decision to pursue charges against OUR or any individuals associated with OUR is prudent. Even though in June of 2021, the same county attorney said, the investigation is still very active and fruitful. I also found references to an article in the New York Times that points to OUR's lack of transparency in how it uses its funds. However, this article costs $1 to read, and I already spent $15 to watch the movie. This is not the topic of this video. Here, I also want to point out that OUR has paid for the services of Janet Russin, a psychic. The Davis County investigator said, Janet Russin talks to dead Mormon leaders, particularly a Mormon prophet from 600 BC named Nephi, to get intel on where to find a kidnapped child in particular, but also with respect to a slew of other things. Janet denies this aspect of her work for OUR, but still, Tim Ballard, although he has stepped away from his position at OUR, has also been accused of multiple women of multiple instances of sexual assault, including using his position of authority in the organization to coerce women into sex. That's gross. At the time I'm recording this, no verdict has been passed, but it's enough to cloud the waters a bit. I want to emphasize here that I am not trying to pass moral judgment on Tim Ballard. I just think these allegations show a deeply broken man who should face justice. How does this weigh against the possibly exaggerated good that he and Operation Underground Railroad have done? I'm not equipped to answer that. What I do want to say is that if, like Jim Caviezel said, you feel helpless, there are better places to send your dollars and time than Operation Underground Railroad. The Sound of Freedom is an unremarkable movie. Its cinematography is quite good, the writing is forgivable, and the subject matter is important. After this video posts, I would very much like to go back to how I was in the spring of 2023, which is to say, I don't want to think about this movie anymore. To me, this movie did not raise awareness of child trafficking. I was already aware of that. Rather, this movie raised awareness of the interminable culture war that touches and ruins everything. The people who marketed this movie understood that anger and outrage spread way more effectively than artistic merit or good faith attempts to connect with your audience. Of course they're not alone in this. Every power structure understands that outrage is the fuel of visibility. If you haven't watched H. Bomber Guy's video about woke brands, I think you should. It's enlightening on the topic. Heck, maybe I'm making the problem worse by making this video for my microscopic audience, but I felt this was something that needed to be said. But here's what I'm begging you. Stop buying it. Stop letting the outrage win. Let unremarkable things be unremarkable. And if you want to go see Sound of Freedom, go for it. As of this video, I no longer care.